Good evening to you. Hope you've had a good and profitable day in your life and in service of the Lord. And we're come together this evening to continue our study of the book of Joshua. We've looked at the conquest of Jericho and Ai, and we talked a little bit in detail about those and how the records of secular history, they don't have too much to say about Jericho and Ai, but the Bible does. And therefore we can see the Bible and see what it says about itself and realize that when they have dug up historical facts about Jericho and Ai, it fits very well with the biblical text, again proving the Bible is worthy of acceptance when we speak about its reality. We're not talking about some town or some city far away that never existed, but it did exist. And we look at also the idea of going up to Jerusalem when you're down lower than Jericho. Jerusalem is higher than Jericho. Everything the Bible says about that. We're going to find some passages in Joshua, though, that the context indicates maybe going up is that I'm going up to fight a king, not I'm going up with a higher elevation, because that's not true. But we look at Gibeon and places where we're going to be looking at. But they're going up, they're going against a foe. So context helps us understand that, and again, the Bible is accurate for the context that we see it in. If somebody took your words out of context and they could disprove some things that you might say, but they don't, when we realize that, what is the context? And that's what we try to do with the scriptures. But tonight we look at going from this central campaign, Jericho, Ai, in that area. Now we're going to look at the southern campaign of Joshua going against the nations or the cities that comprised a group of people that we see twice here in Joshua 10 of the Amorites. That includes a lot of the cities that the kings are going to be representing here in our text. So notice in Bethel and Ai, now we saw last chapter, we saw Gibeon. What happened at Gibeon? It hadn't happened yet. It's getting ready to happen, but what do we know about Gibeon? What did they do? The inhabitants of Gibeon, they don't have a king. The inhabitants of Gibeon, they got an idea that says, hey, we've seen what has happened, and we're going with Jericho and Ai, and they're very close by. You got Bethel and Ai. They all came down, and we got Jericho. Now south of that is Gibeon, and they've heard what's happened there, and they realize that they're not going to be able to defeat Joshua and his army of Israel. So they set out to deceive and say that they're from a very far away place. In order to indicate that, they had molded bread, they had bags that would carry the wine, let it naturally ferment, and they would be torn and so forth. Their shoes were old, and we're ambassadors from a very far country, is what they said. They lied, they deceived the people, but again, on the side of the people of God, they made an oath, they made a promise that they would indeed preserve them. They're not going. We got Jericho and Ai. We realize that could happen to us. And we talked a little bit about last time. Your oaths are very important with God. If it's a sinful thing, a husband or a wife, as we saw in the book of Numbers, could override that oath. They could override that oath and say that was not wise to do. And I'm a husband. I'm the father of the daughter. And they could set forth, and God would allow that. But some have indicated, well, if you make a promise, like if you become married to a lady or a man, and you find out later that you're living in adultery, it's all right to stay in adultery because you made an oath, and you do not ever take away those oaths. That you don't ever go against them. Did we make an oath when we were married? You promise. That's an oath. Especially with your yea be yea, your nay be nay. And so they realize, well, sometimes you have to have those situations where you're going to have to stay in that relationship that you promised to do because you can't break oaths. It's not what we talked about last week is the fact that you had people, they were the part of the oaths that we're going to be your slaves. We're going to be your servants. And that's what they said they would be. If they would indeed protect them and bring them into their group where they'll protect them. They just protected some people from Jericho, and they sealed that with an oath that they indeed had to do. But God doesn't want us to be involved in doing something that is sinful. Being a servant is not sinful. Living in adultery is a sinful thing. Herod did not have a right to his brother's wife. He had married her. They weren't just living together. He married her, and it was not lawful. What was one to do after John the Baptist said, you have no right to have her? He made a promise too. That's his wife. But he had to come out of that relationship, and he wasn't willing to do that. So it's one thing to make an oath, and it's based upon something that's sinful that I don't have to come out of because I made an oath. And if you compare that with this is why I bring that up. That's the argument given for maybe one even living in adultery would have to stay in that relationship because the oath overrided the fact that there was a sin. This is not even a sin. And there were people spared that we'll see in chapter 10 over and over again that everyone was killed. Everyone that, as we'll see in chapter 11, everything that breathed was killed. And we say, well, that sounds like the Bible speaks about genocide. So we're on these arguments made by that. How do you react to those who turn down the Bible? In fact, you read the Old Testament one time, you want anything to do with God. That's what some have done. They've read the Bible, they've read the Old Testament, and if that's the God that we see there, they don't want to read it again. And they say, well, that God just wiped out people. And did he or did he not? I mean, you're going to have to he didn't really mean to do that. No, everything that breathed. All of the people, no one's left alive. And as we'll see, there'll be some remnant of individuals that go to fortified cities that escape, as we'll see in chapter 10. But ideas that they were to do that. So why does God wipe out cities of people? And we say, well, that's not genocide. Well, it is. I'm wiping out the whole nation. That's what we're doing. And God does that. How do we respond to that? How do you respond to that? Because we're going to be seeing these cities wiped out of people. Is there anything wrong with genocide today? Of people going in and murdering and getting rid of nationalities and or races of people? Genocide? We see in our world today, some say, well, they equate that with God. One thing I respond is that's exactly what happened. Now what? Because we're dealing with God. And we're dealing with a holy God. Why does he not want them to have anything to do with the people in the land? Amorites, the Hittites, Canaanites, we want them. Now you're going to take their land, you're going to have to destroy the people. Why did he want that to occur?
Idolatry.
Yeah, that's part of his holiness. He's a holy God. He's a loving God. He can be a wrathful God. But who are we dealing with? We're dealing with God who's let himself be known that he's holy. And he did not want them to be taken off into idolatry. That's why you don't marry the foreign women. I believe Ruth was a foreign woman, and it's all right to marry that one. What does she do first? I want to be with your people. Your God. What? Your God will be my God? So you had individuals turning to God, and they could be married. But the point is the idolatrous part, and Solomon realized he had to meet the consequences of that. He married foreign women. Moses had a Midianite. He married a Pharaoh woman. But the point is, she probably wanted to be serving the God that Moses served. That's not true with some of these women, because he began to practice idolatry that they do. That's where God steps in. That's why, while some get married, some don't, he's a holy God. And if they're going to now convert, and Gibeon is now going to convert to being among the people of Israel, even though they're going to live in another city, and they live in another town, they're going to be protected by Israelites as we see this day. But that's the dealing with God. God has not hid himself of who he is. And it just frees me up to see, all right, whatever you are, God, I'm trying to understand that. And I understand that, and that's the way it's going to be with you. And we learn to realize that God is a gracious God, and he's one that doesn't fit in with what we think a God ought to do. Can you imagine two little children praying to God in a setting where they're having a religious service this morning, and an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old are sitting there praying, and a bullet passes through their body? What about a God like that? Well, 8 and 10-year-olds are not accountable probably for God. They're little children. What's God going to do with little children? Well, you didn't get them baptized quick enough, and therefore, you robbed my child of heaven because they had to get them baptized. Well, the Bible doesn't teach that. They're safe. And to realize that here is something that, yes, it's tragic. Why does God allow that? All those things he allows. He could stop anything. Can you imagine somebody praying to you and God takes them that day? Oh, he didn't do that. Well, what did he do? Well, he's not in control. And you have to just think about that and realize, indeed, they're innocent, and they're the ones that are going to be going to heaven. I hope their mom and dads turn from the false teaching that they're going to be under. But there's the point of realizing God is we're responsible for ourselves in an age of accountability. These things are happening. We can learn from them. Is life fair? No. And God allows the evil to occur, and we can overcome evil with good. That's what we're doing as God's people. And that's the character of God. People think God, when they read the Bible, that he is a narcissist to the extreme. It is all about God. And I say, yes, he sure is. It's all about him. Why are we created in the image of God? So we would serve him and praise him. What do we see in the nature? What's that all about? It manifests glory of God. It's about him. Yes, it is. And we've sinned. What's the problem? You fell short of the glory of God. Glorify God in your body. It's all about glorifying God. It's not God. Aren't you happy to have people? Is that why you created us? Because you needed companionship? No. Had the Holy Spirit, had the Son, had the Father. The Godhead was there. They had acted with one another. They were perfectly happy. But we were created by God to glorify him. And that is he's here to help me. He's here to serve me. And that's why we study Old Testament, New Testament. And the more I do that, the more I realize, God, I want to have the concept that you revealed. And you're not self-centered. You're God. And that what men consider self-centeredness is who you are. And you have every right to be that, because you are the creator of all things. And he tries to get his people to understand that. You're the clay, I'm the potter. Who are you to question me? Oh, God, you're just full of yourself. Yes, he is. He's full of glory. And his grace is abundant so that we can, in our selfishness can turn to him and have forgiveness. And he's keeping his people from going in, and it'll be a thorn in their flesh because they don't wipe out all the people, as we'll see as time goes on, and it will take them into idolatry, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And we've been studying that, what happens after and involved with that. So here's the thing of Gibeon. We're going to see those things, but those are things I bring up because it helps us study, and we sometimes run away. We just run away. I don't want to deal with that genocide stuff. Well, you just read over and over again. He just wipes out the people. We see that women, children, they were killed in the Old Testament. Well, that's the God of the Old Testament. God is God. And that's how he dealt in the Old Testament. And we come to the New Testament and realize what all this was leading for is the coming of his son, so we could be saved. So now we're also going to look at Makkedah. That's the place where these 5 kings are going to try to hide. When we get to that, we're talking about that. What happens in Ajalon, right above that, and Beth Horon? So you got Gibeon, Beth Horon, Ajalon. What happens there that we'll talk about in chapter 10? Joshua commands the what? The sun to stand still. Did it? It did. Oh, it's impossible. Well, it did. We're going to believe the Bible. We're going to do that. We'll talk, well, what does that mean? What's the purpose of that? We'll see that. So that's what we'll be looking at here. It's a southern campaign. I got this down to Jarmuth. It's right above Asakah. When we go back to Asakah right there, you got right above that would be Jarmuth on this map. So you got Beth Horon. You're going further south. It's the southern campaign. The central part, Ai, Jericho, that's been now, that's the first coming into the land. Now we're going to take the southern campaign of overcoming this towns, and then we'll head north as we go through these next few chapters. But there's Beth Horon, there's Ajalon Valley, and we've got Jerusalem there. But Gilgal, why is that important to us in these sections? Who's at Gilgal? That's where their camp is. That's right. That's where Joshua is camping. That's where he goes from in order to take Jericho, and now here is Gibeon on this side. So let's notice, what group of people did the Confederacy of Kings represent? Joshua 10 and verse 5 is where we find the answer. And he said, therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites. 5 kings of the Amorites. That was a word denoting the Canaanites, those who occupied this area of the land that's promised unto the God's people. So he describes them that way here, and he does it more than once here in this chapter. What three things troubled these kings about Israel and Gibeon? So Gibeon, remember, they're now by oath, they're going to be protected by Israel, and they're going to put their allegiance with Israel. They're going up with Israel, and so they're included here. So what 3 things does he say?
What they did to Ai, they knew Gibeon was a great city, inviting in, and they brought themselves in subjection to Israel.
That's right. And here we kind of look back at those battles, and God's holiness wasn't honored at Ai. They failed the first time. They have to go back and take it again because there's a holy God. There's sin in their camp. That's very, very important to them. But they've heard what happened. And her king, they utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king, as he had done Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. They weren't dwelling in them because they got a problem in Gibeon, and Israel's camped out over here in Gilgal. But they were among them because that's where we're tying our hope with, our future with. And those were indeed the things that would, it's going to lead to being protected on this particular occasion that will occur. How far was Gilgal from Gibeon? Did you look it up? Not in kilometers. How many miles?
One night's travel.
Well, yeah, it'd be kind of, it was a big deal. It surprised them, didn't it? But they traveled it one night. That's exactly right. We'll get that in just a moment. But so I'm just laying down the groundwork. Why is that a big deal? Because how many miles from those two places? I think that's how far is that in miles?
That's about 16 to 20 miles.
16 to 20?
Yeah, the range
I saw 18 to 20, so that's what I have too. And so that's a pretty good distance. Now, in biblical times, I don't know, do you walk 3.5 miles an hour? We all should. No big deal, as I've been told. Well, if you walk 2 miles an hour, if it's 18 miles, how long would it take you to get there? Hours. So what do we do on our trips? We break them up. And a lot of times, in Bible times, that would be a 3-day journey. 8 to 16 or 18 to 20 miles, that'd be a 3-day journey. And that's the way you take your trips now? We break it up? Well, when you get older, you will. But you're too young right now, I guess. And all you old people are pretty young too. I break up let's break up that trip. We'll rest for a while and go the next time instead of going all the way. I've been to Florida all the way from Fort Worth, and I don't know if I could do that again. I didn't do it very well that time, but we did it because we had to. But there's the sense of that's a pretty long distance in order to accomplish, to protect them. They get word that indeed they come and don't waste any time, come and help us. How quickly did Joshua and his fighting men travel the distances? We've heard the hill. What was it? They did it overnight. So let's say it's 18 miles. They just overnight they got the job done, and they came and so the men of Gibeon sent unto Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, "Slack not thy hand." So they didn't. They didn't waste time, and they gathered against us. And so Joshua in verse 7, he went from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. Why does he make that distinction, you think? And don't see the women and children going, because we're going to fight some battle. They stay in Gilgal. But all the people of war with him. And so here we know, when were you registering in the army in Israel in those days? What age? I thought you're 20 years old. And so you got men of people of war that they're able to physically handle the war. But he says with him and all the mighty men of valor. Here we're strong men, but what does valor mean? They had courage. They had courage. We don't want him backing off. You're going to start. So you're able to fight war, but you're also mighty, powerful, and you're full of courage, and you're able to do that. And Jehovah said in verse 9 says that Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly. Why? Here's to our point. For he went up from Gilgal all the night. That surprised them, because that's not the way it would normally happen. We'd break that trip up. But here was men of war. And just imagine, they'll just keep on trucking all the night until they travel that particular distance. What gave Joshua confidence against his foes? That's right. What God said, verse 8. Jehovah said unto Joshua, "Fear them not, for I have delivered them into thy hands." It's already done. That's why here's men of courage. It gives you courage. He's already done this. And you just need to carry out what you need to do. And there shall not a man of them that shall be able to stand before it. They'll stand before thee. Not a man will stand before thee. I mean, that's what God says. Do you believe what God says? Joshua does. Did they believe that when they came into Jericho? March around the city one time a day, and next day 7 times. You had to have faith in order to trust God. Then you had to have obedient faith that took courage to do what God said to do. But it's all about God's grace too. I've delivered it to you. It's not anything special you are, but I have done that. And he's going to let himself be known with that as well. So that's who gives him confidence. What direction did the enemy flee from Joshua? See if we can go. And we read the Bible, so if we're following the Bible, which direction from Gibeon did they go? Did they go south? Or do they first of all go northwest? Which would you say? I would say northwest. And even though we're talking about a southern campaign, why do we say that? Jehovah discomfited them, verse 10, before Israel, and he slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and then he smote them to Asakah unto Makkedah. Where's that? Makkedah, that's when we looked at it, that's heading south. So you have the ascent to Beth Horon, and that becomes very, very important that they started that way. And what happens is that they end up going south. Now the question is, how come that happens? And that's where we get to the next question, question number 6. What direction did we went northwest and they head south? What do verses 10 and 11 tell us about the terrain of Beth Horon? Why do you think that's happening? First of all, they come to the ascent of Beth Horon, and if they wanted to continue to go that direction, they don't, because they start heading south. What might have been the terrain? If you didn't know anything else, you said, something's happened here. And then you look at things and realize that probably was the problem. David?
Beth Horon must have been like a hill or a small mountain, by the way they describe it. Only the ascent there and then the descent. It must have been like a hill.
That's right. You say, well, I'm pleading. But let's say there was the rocks were steep, or the hills were steep, the rocks were loose. Those things that you try to walk is very, very difficult. And there would be tendency to just head south. It's going to be easier terrain for us to escape. And historians and people that have studied that have realized that that's kind of the terrain. It was very rough terrain. Sometimes you had to set footing in the side of that mountain for you to climb. And it wasn't just easy to climb or go sideways on it. A lot of the rocks and things like that wasn't where you could, and they're trying to get away. And so it just kind of running down the other direction, that it was easier for them to go. And so that occurred. Now question 7, how did God kill the enemy unto Asakah, going this south? How did God do this? Because they're fighting, and there's a slaughter about them. But verse 11, it said Jehovah cast down what in verse 11? He cast down great stones. And it came from Beth Horon, all those rocks. It came from where? It came from heaven upon them unto Asakah, and they died. That's what we find. So what was noteworthy about that, about this divine intervention? Yeah, it killed more than the sword did. And why is that there? Is that I'm letting you know I've done this. I'm the one that is, I've commanded you to do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to wipe them out and do that. You bring your sword. But he lets them know that indeed who is behind this. He killed more with the hailstones than with the sword. Again, God's intervention. And that's what, that you know, I've delivered it to you. And he puts his stamp on that. And I think that becomes very important. All right, question number 9. What did Joshua command to occur over Gibeon? So here's Gibeon, and then the valley of Ajalon, and then you're about Beth Hebron. So you have that kind of triangle there, the vicinity of there. They're heading down south this. So what happens there? What did Joshua command to occur over Gibeon and the valley of Ajalon? Commanded the sun to what? Stand still. And the moon to stand still. He's probably talking about the light of the moon to remain in place, but it just stands still over that valley. And it's a noteworthy thing in the Bible. And we felt, so he says the sun stands still. The Alpha and Gibeon, if it did, and I believe it did, what really occurred? If the sun would stand still, now we know it's the rotation of the earth that is our relationship with the sun. Sun rotates on its axis, but we rotate around the sun. How fast is the earth around the equator spinning? It doesn't seem too fast right now, huh? David?
About 6,000 miles.
Well, at the equator, I found 1,000 around the equator, 1,000 miles per hour, and that's the fastest around there. You may be right, 6,000. I think 1,000 is pretty fast, don't you? If you give me that, that's what I found over and over again, in keeping it simple about that. But if that's the case, that we're moving 3 times faster than our jets will fly from here to LA. You know, they get going up there 300, 350 miles an hour, and if you got 1,000, we're 3 times faster than the jet. We're moving through space that way. And so for the sun, the sun rises, and no, the earth rotates. If looking at from that standpoint, if this happened, and God can make it any way he wants to happen, but if for it to stand still, and it did, and the moon to stand still in its lower place, what was the whole purpose of that? The question is why? What's the purpose? Now give us time, light. Give us the time so we can finish up destroying all the people that were around as they go south. And so that's the purpose for it. The light would remain so they could finish their work. And you're going to pick up some, probably these kings hiding and so forth, but they're chasing them. Thank you. And that's what is occurring. So if that's the case, if the earth stood still, and God has the power to do that, and therefore, but the moon, because the gravity of the earth rotates around us, you know, it's in this orbit. We've captured it, and the moon's the shining of the moon would be a reflection of the sun. It's to stand still. So let's say the earth stands still, and God has His power over things. When our earth quits spinning, what would happen if it quit spinning right now? So would you fly to heaven or hell? Well, I'm going to help you. You would fly eastward. And you would fly eastward very fast. Can you imagine? We're going 1,000, or David says 6,000 miles per hour, and realize that here the monument went up before I'm chasing the monument, and we're flying east. We're going that fast at the when this thing stops. We're moving. All the trees, as you say, all the things will be going. And you're going to find tsunamis, you're going to find earthquakes. The gravitational idea of the earth with all of its powers, it's going to be a catastrophe. Just the fact of moving us around if it stood still. Now, God can control that. And I think he could very well allow the earth stand still. He protects us from all the things that would happen, and nothing like that happened. It allowed the sun to be standing where it is without it being, it's plasma, so to speak, but it still rotates on axis. And so part of it is faster than others in its rotation. But it would give that light until we finished our job. He could do that. Now, has this been proven by modern scientists? A few years ago, we said, yeah, it's been proven, and found out, no, that wasn't true. But who went after that to say it's been proven by scientists? Brethren did. We found something that's proven by the scientists, and they had to end up, we don't have, they said, well, there's some missed time there, and it just happens to be probably the time that the sun stood still. And they found out that's not true. So we had to back that off. I don't think it's been proven by modern scientists. And scientists are things that are trying to look at things of laws of nature that they have. This was beyond that. If this was, you want to call something that transcends natural law? Is God allowing an earth to stand still? Joshua's not sitting there flying 6,000 miles per hour or 1,000 miles per hour through the air for that period of time. He controlled all those things. Can God do that?
He made it, he ought to be able to.
Yeah, he can control it. And it also reminds me when we see things happening, how God brings this world to an end. But it's like the sun's coming and going to gobble us up one day, or we'll have the global warming cause it to happen. God's going to bring end to things. He's going to destroy it by fire. But it's not going to be because we had too much smog and we didn't do enough about it, and so all of mankind was taken out of the way. And how did we had dinosaurs. People have different theories of why the dinosaurs ended and so forth. And one theory I heard this week is that the old dinosaurs, that they all died off. The young dinosaurs evolved into birds. They were the smart ones because they got to survive. And I thought about that. Well, if that's the case, your Bible, the birds survived the flood. And but animals on the earth and so forth, that indeed they were just destroyed by the flood. And I think the dinosaurs kind of could be destroyed by that. I see rocks with dinosaurs tracks going straight up in the Grand Canyon and in Colorado. How did that happen? And it probably was some nut, some high school nut doing graffiti for me, trying to make me prove that indeed there was a flood. But the earth opened up, where dinosaurs used to go, the earth's going to open up. It's be proven. But scientists had to back off of that. It was NASA people, and they had to realize that indeed was not happening. So next time, the miracle recorded in the New Testament, other place in the Old Testament, the book of Joshua, both A and D. We'll talk about that next time. Any comments or questions you might have? Or you want to add something to it? We didn't get to hear you? Okay, thank you.